Now we move to the second category, which is going to be fit. Fit is by far the most important function that they will perform. If a sock is extremely well built, but is uncomfortable or is restrictive or is very loose, then obviously it doesn't serve a purpose whatsoever. The fit of the sock is of fundamental importance. So let us see what the points are in this particular category. The first point would be the sizing and width of the sock. This particular size that we are testing, it's the medium size, which is supposed to go from 9.5 to 10 inches US. We have right here at the very end of the heel, all the way to the front. We have about 9.5 centimeters, and they're supposed to cover all the way up to 10, which it's right here and would be a little short. However, myself being a 10 and having worn these socks for 4 hours during my test, I can tell you that they stretch with no issue whatsoever. And so while the dry measurements are always going to be a little bit shorter than the wet measurements, that is okay. As for width, which is usually a very important factor because a lot of these socks are actually narrower than most people's feet, I can tell you that for a length of 9.5 to a width at the widest part of basically 4 inches, okay? The socks have a proper ratio to width, from width to length. We are gonna give the socks 5 points. In the area of sizing, it is the same sizing as the Zero socks. This is a medium size, supposed to be up to a 10-inch American size, which it almost is. However, just like with the Zero socks, these things flex a lot. Because of how flexible they are, the width also of the socks is not an issue. They kind of stretch as much as needed. And so in terms of sizing and width, the socks score 5 points out of a possible 5. Now, the next point is going to be the transition area. Basically, the transition area of any sock is going to be that often overlooked by manufacturers part that covers the top or the tarsal area of the foot right here. And let's not forget that that top part of the foot is the one that constantly bends and expands, where all of the ligaments and all of the muscles that are actually in that area, which are very large and need a lot of space to expand. And when the sock is designed in a way that doesn't have enough neoprene to allow that area to work, then eventually what happens is that we can either lose blood circulation on those areas, or we start getting tired, or even worse, we do not extend our foot fully in the motion that we're supposed to because we're trying to avoid that discomfort, and then our technique suffers. If you look at these socks right here, they don't really have a dedicated transition area. You don't see that sort of extra neoprene going from here, somewhere here, that sort of triangular shape covering that area. And as you will see in the next point, there is an abundance of extra neoprene right at the bottom of the sock, which is a problem, and I'll explain why later, but at the very least, that extra neoprene sort of stretches upwards and becomes part of the transition area. However, this is not a dedicated transition area, and while I didn't feel any particular discomfort with these 3mm socks, I am almost certain that had I been wearing the 5mm socks, that absence of a dedicated transition area would have probably become a problem, and it would have not been as easy to wear the socks. I'm gonna give them 4 points out of 5. Now, for transition area, as you can see here, not only with this sort of very flexible giving material, this wouldn't be an issue, but there is actually, if you notice right here, there is actually a transition area. The socks do not come straight and then turn upwards at a 45 or 90 degree angle like most socks would, but there is an area here that overlaps and sort of compensates for that increased surface on the tarsal area of the foot. So these socks indeed have a dedicated transition area built into them. So kudos for that. That's one thing that makes it very comfortable. Again, 5 points out of a possible 5. The next point in the fit category is going to be anatomical compliance. And anatomical compliance simply means, is this sock made to fit a human foot or not? Or is it simply, as most socks in the market are, nothing more than two tubes of neoprene joined together at a 45-degree angle? I can tell you that about 90% of socks out there are nothing more than that. Let's get into detail. We have something really interesting here for the Zero Socks, and it is the fact that they actually have a right and a left sock. If we look at them right here, you can see that each of the socks have an indication of whether it is meant to be worn on the right foot or on the left foot right here. And what it does basically is what you would expect it, which is there is an arch, there is a curve that is meant to cover the natural shape of the toes once they fit inside the sock, which is more comfortable than a tubular sock, which will either end up being too narrow or just to cover the actual width of the toes. Then it'll end up with a lot of leftover neoprene right at the front that usually is going to have to go somewhere, and it's going to fold and make a fold that is going to bother the toes at the front of the sock. However, one thing that bothered me a little bit is the amount of extra neoprene right here at the back of the sock, which is common to most other socks I have seen. But as we all know, the human foot, while wider at the front, it tends to narrow down as it comes down to the heel. And let us not forget one more time that most foot pockets are actually going to be narrower at the back, just like feet are. So that extra amount of neoprene is going to have to find its way somewhere. And if you are wearing foot pockets that fit tightly, that extra neoprene, it's going to make an impact, and it can become very uncomfortable. So for that particular reason, I'm giving the socks on the anatomical compliance category 4 points out of 5. Anatomical compliance. Again, by now I've made it clear that these socks are very flexible and they contour very easily to the shape of the foot. And so anatomical compliance, it's not going to be a problem with the socks. Their anatomical compliance, again, earns them a 5 points out of a possible 5. They really fit extremely well. In overall comfort, what can I say about the socks? Despite the two issues that we just reviewed of them not having a dedicated transition area and not having a tapering, a narrowing towards the back, as we just discussed, I have to admit, however, that after wearing the socks for a long period of time, almost 5 hours, the overall comfort with the socks over an extended period of time was always there. And I was not bothered, and I did not feel that my technique was compromised. And because of that, I'm going to give them 5 points. And so we come to the part of overall comfort for the socks. They were extremely comfortable. Remember, you are not going to get the sort of like cushioning effect that you get with neoprene socks, which adds perceptibly to the amount of comfort that those socks can give you, and you're not exposed directly to the hard rubber of the foot pockets, but there is a layer of soft, pliable neoprene between the foot and the foot pocket. None of that can be found here, and so in that sense, to no fault of their own, the socks may not feel as comfortable to people who are used to wearing neoprene socks. But with time, you can overcome that because they fit very well and they are very comfortable. And the one thing that I can say is that after wearing them for a while, I actually forgot that I was wearing them, which is obviously the biggest compliment that we can pay not only to a pair of socks, but to any piece of protective clothing. And so on overall comfort, they once again earn 5 points out of 5. So we have come to the end where we announce the final scores. The Zero Socks earned so far a combined score of 45 points. However, given the fact that out of those 5 points that they lost, 2 of them came in the fit area where I took a point away from the lack of a dedicated transition area, and for the excessive width of or lack of tapering at the bottom of the sock towards the rear. Then I went and gave the socks 5 points in the overall comfort category because ultimately they felt very comfortable when I wore them over the extended period of time where I performed the test. I feel that this is somewhat contradictory. And while it is true that in the 5mm version of these socks, it will probably be more noticeable and even bothersome or restrictive, they were not bothersome enough, in the 3mm socks that I wore for that score to remain as is. So what I am going to do, I'm going to add one more point and tally it to the overall score, therefore giving the socks a total of 46 points, which puts them in the category of outstanding product, highly recommended. What do I think of this new product? Is it worth the effort? Is it certainly worth the expense, considering that they actually fit within the expensive denomination? Well, yes. But let me make two clarifications. First of all, if you're going to wear these socks as your primary and only socks, then be aware that they are not going to provide any of the benefits of a neoprene sock. They're not going to give you cushioning. They're not going to protect you from the constant friction inflicted by a somewhat loose foot pocket. So if friction is an issue for you, then you probably need to consider neoprene socks. Now, where I find these socks to be a very interesting product is if they are to be worn as a secondary sock, as a secondary layer, as a shell, if you will, on top of a neoprene sock. We gain now all of the protective advantages of this sock. They're almost indestructible outer shell, the excellent non-slip capabilities, which is better than any other neoprene sock out there, and that is very important. But in terms of the indestructibility of this sock, for people such as myself and many others around the world that routinely enter the water in areas where there are rocks and pebbles or gravel or loose corals or any other kind of matter that can be abrasive or that can be sharp, that can be a risk to our feet as we're entering the water. Wearing this on top of the existing neoprene socks will be a protective barrier, a defense against all of those particular issues. You could potentially, if you were wearing 3mm socks, you could now step down to 2mm or 1.5mm socks, which are a lot more comfortable if you wear this on top of those less thick socks. Yes, this can impact the buoyancy if you need the extra neoprene to keep your fins on the surface, but if buoyancy is not an issue, you can now step down in thickness with your neoprene socks and compensate for that lost thickness with the addition of these socks, which, as I just said, do not compress as they go deep. So while the use for the Dyn socks might be limited for most people, they do offer an advantage in combination with neoprene socks that, in my opinion, would be unmatched. Now, the Zero socks earn a total score of 44 points. Which puts them in the category of very good product, recommended. Good job to C4 for putting so much effort and attention to detail into these products. And so with that, we have come to the end of this review. We bid you safe dives and check back with us next week for the next installment of our test lab.